but those families know that we have a policy that we don't pay ransom. And the notion that we would somehow start now in this high-profile way and announce it to the world even as we're looking into the faces of other hostage families whose loved ones are being held hostage and say to them that we don't pay ransom defies logic. So that's point number 2. We do not pay ransom. We didn't hear. And we won't in the future precisely because if we did, then we would start encouraging Americans to be targeted, much in the same way that some countries that do pay ransom end up having a lot more of their citizens being taken by various groups. Point number 3 is that the timing of this was, in fact, dictated by the fact that as a consequence of us negotiating around the nuclear deal, we actually had diplomatic negotiations and conversations with Iran for the first time in several decades. So the issue is not so much that it was a coincidence as it is that we were able to have a direction discussion. John Kerry could meet with the foreign minister, which meant that our ability to clear accounts on a number of different issues at the same time converged. And it was important for us to take advantage of that opportunity both to deal with this litigation risk that had been raised. It was important for us to make sure that we finished the job on the Iran nuclear deal, and since we were in a conversation with them, it was important for us to be able to push them hard in getting these Americans out. And let me make a final point on this. It's now been well over a year since the agreement with Iran to stop its nuclear program was signed. And by all accounts, it has worked exactly the way we said it was going to work. You will recall that there were all these horror stories about how Iran was going to cheat. And this wasn't going to work, and Iran was going to get $150 billion to finance terrorism and all these kinds of scenarios. And none of them have come to pass. And it's not just the assessment of our intelligence community. It's the assessment of the Israeli military and intelligence. Community, the country that was most opposed to this deal. That acknowledges this has been a game changer, and that Iran has abided by the deal. And that they no longer have the sort of short-term breakout capacity that would allow them to develop nuclear weapons. So what I'm interested in is, if there's some news to be made. Why not have some of these folks who were predicting disaster say, you know what, this thing actually worked. Now that would be a shock. That would be impressive, if some of these folks who had said the sky is falling suddenly said, you know what, we were wrong and we are glad that Iran know. Longer has the capacity to break out in short term and develop a nuclear weapon. But, of course, that wasn't going to happen. Instead, what we have is the manufacturing of outrage in a story that we disclosed in January. And the only bit of news that is relevant on this is the fact that we paid cash, which brings me to my last point. The reason that we had to give them cash is precisely because we are so strict in maintaining sanctions, and we Do not have a banking relationship with Iran that we couldn't send them a check and we could not wire the money. And it is not at all clear to me why it is that cash. As opposed to a check or a wire transfer, has made this into a new story. Maybe because it kind of feels like some spy novel or some crime novel because cash was exchanged. The reason cash was exchanged is because we don't have a banking relationship with Iran. Which is precisely part of the pressure that we're able to apply to them so that they would. Ship a whole bunch of nuclear material out and close down a bunch of facilities that as I remember, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. Was people's top fear and priority that we make sure Iran doesn't have breakout nuclear capacity. They don't. This worked. Josh Laterman. Question, thank you, Mr. President. Repeatedly now, Donald Trump has said that this election will be rigged against him. Challenging really the core foundation of our democratic system. Can you promise the American people that this election will be conducted in a fair way? And are you worried that comments like his could erode the public's faith in the outcome of the election? And if he does win, given that you have just declared him unfit, what will you say to the American people? President Obama, well, at the end of the day, it's the American people's decision. I have one vote. I have the same vote you do. I have the vote that all the voters who are eligible all across. The country have. I've offered my opinion, but ultimately it's the American people's decision to make collectively. and if somebody wins the election and they are president, then my constitutional responsibility is to peacefully transfer power to that individual and do everything I can to help them succeed. It is I don't even really know where to start on answering this question. Of course the elections will not be rigged. What does that mean? The federal government doesn't run the election process. States and cities and communities all across the country, they are the ones who set up the voting systems and the voting booths. And if Mr. Trump is suggesting that there is a conspiracy theory that is being propagated across the country, including in places like Texas, where typically it's not Democrats who are in charge of voting booths, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. And I don't think anybody would take that seriously. Now, we do take seriously as we always do our responsibilities. To monitor and preserve the integrity of the voting process. If we see signs that a voting machine or system is vulnerable to hacking, then we inform those local authorities who are running the elections that they need to be careful. If we see jurisdictions that are violating federal laws in terms of equal access and aren't providing ramps for disabled voters, or are discriminating in some fashion, or are otherwise violating civil rights laws, then the Justice Department will come in and take care of that. But this will be an election like every other election. And I think all of us at some points in our lives have played. Sports, or maybe just played in a schoolyard or a sandbox. And sometimes folks, if they lose, they start complaining that they got cheated. But I've never heard of somebody complaining about being cheated before the game was over. Or before the score is even tallied. So my suggestion would be go out there and try to win the election. If Mr. Trump is up 10 or 15 points on election day and ends up losing, then maybe he can raise some questions. That doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. Barbara Starr. Question, thank you, Mr. President. On the question of ISIS expansion that you've been talking about. Because you see them expanding around the world, because you see them trying to inspire attacks. What is your current level of concern about the homeland? You talk about the protection measures, but what is your assessment about the possibility? Your own intelligence advisors suggest is possible about the direct ISIS threat to Americans. And if I may follow up somewhat along the same lines. What is your assessment today as you stand here about whether Donald Trump can be trusted with America's nuclear weapons? President Obama, on your second question, and I'll sort of address this to any. Additional Trump questions, I would ask all of you to just make your own judgment. I've made this point already multiple times. Just listen to what Mr. Trump has to say and make your own. Judgment with respect to how confident you feel about his ability to manage things like our nuclear triad. Question, with respect, sir, it suggests that you're not confident. President Obama, well, as I recall. I just answered a question about this a couple days ago and I thought I made myself pretty clear. And I don't want to just keep on repeating it, or a variation on it. I obviously have a very strong opinion about the two candidates who are running here. One is very positive and one is not so much. And I think that you will just hear. Any further questions that are directed at this subject? I think you'll hear pretty much variations on the same theme. What I can say is that this is serious business. And the person who is in the Oval Office and who are Secretary of Defense and our Joint Chiefs. Of staff and our outstanding men and women in uniform report to. They are counting on somebody who has the temperament and good judgment to be able to make decisions to keep America safe. And that should be very much on the minds of voters when they go into the voting booth in November. In terms of the threat that ISIL poses to the homeland, I think it is serious. We take it seriously. And as I said earlier, precisely because they are less concerned about big spectacular 9/11 style attacks, because they've seen the degree of attention they can get with smaller scale. Attacks using small arms or assault rifles, or, in the case of Nice, France, a truck. The possibility of either a lone actor or a small cell carrying out an attack that kills people is real.